Okay, so I'm Sergio from Extinction Rebellion in Australia. This is a strategy video from 2019 where I did, research on how the police here in Brisbane were operating and developed a concept of how we use police resources to facilitate more and more disruption. So you will have to do your own research in your own city because different places have different capacities. But this is the Brisbane example. This is of particular use in the mass mobilisation period of your campaign. Here in Australia, in the Australian Mass Mobilisation project, this would be our wave 3 sort of tactics, where you have your day after day sitting on the road disruptions. How do we make it effective, and how do we maximize certain bottlenecks that the authorities have?
Hello Rebels, my name is Sergio from Extinction Rebellion Southeast Queensland, and as you might know, we're going to be mobilising in about a week on October 7th. What this means will be mass participation civil disobedience, so taking streets and holding them until the government meets our demands. That means staying there overnight, bringing your tent, and being willing to be arrested and get back out there and sit back on the streets. Again and again, we're aiming for at least a week disruption, but hopefully a lot more than that if we can continue the momentum. So I'm just making this video to sort of talk a little bit about the way that I envision sort of like the way that you can disrupt things efficiently. On August 6th we held a sort of day of disruption called Rebellion Day, and over 70 people were arrested and charged. No sort of like devices were used for that in that day, so no super glue or hanging off a bridge with ropes or lock-ons, these kinds of things, they weren't used. It was just people putting their body places and willingly being arrested for standing up for what they believe in, or in this case sitting down on the road. But so I would propose that in a situation where we have mass mobilisation, where we are looking to actually cause maximal disruption in order to get our voices heard, I propose that actually using some devices like super glue is pretty easy and will prolong the disruption a lot more than it would if just like one group of people used it on a random day. So what this would look like would be multiple people, 5 people say, in a bunch of different spots around the city, super glued to a road. What we've seen in the past is that the police need to
establish what they call a safe working environment to unglue or cut someone out of a device. This often takes up a lot of police resources. Sorry about it, just cut out, but here's the example of where we first saw that here in Brisbane.
So there was a march, July 5th, 3,000 people, it was plenty of fun. At the end of the march, 7 people, I believe, glued themselves to the road in South Brisbane. Was it Grey Street? And the police didn't do anything for quite some time. I'd say over an hour and a half, a bit over that. So what I saw was paramedics had to arrive. They had some huddles with policemen with nice big hats and whatnot to figure out what they'd do about it. And then once they figured that out, which took quite a while, what they did was they had to get a bunch of cops. I estimate about 40 police officers involved in each unsticking, possibly 30, but that sort of range. And they would form a circle around that person that is glued onto the road, and then some officers that were trained would come into the police circle and remove the person with acetone, and then they'd have to do that 7 times, and it took over an hour, definitely. But yeah, what that means is that the police have a certain capacity at any point, and it also means that there's an operational procedure that needs to be outlined and then executed when you do things like apply devices like super glue, lock-on devices. So that's any kind of tube where 2 people are linked up to each other, or even a bicycle lock, for example. You can lock yourself to something or someone else, because it's very easy for one single police officer who is trained to do so, which all police officers are, to get someone sitting on a road and pick them up and take them off. It's a very simple operation. They don't need any deliberation or any sort of complicated operation to take place to remove you. It's also a lot more calm when you are using tools like super glue, because everyone involved knows that you are physically stuck there. They're not going to try to forcibly remove you. They'll use the they're at least supposed to use the correct protocol, which is gently applying the acetone to your hand if you stuck your hand to the road, for example. So having groups holding different important locations, whether it be a bridge or an intersection or a road, where people are glued onto it, onto that the spot that's being held or locked on or locked together with chain, that's going to drastically increase the time that you can actually hold a spot. And I'd say super glue I quite like because it's so easy. You can put it in your pocket. You can go and get it from a convenience store if they're checking people's pockets, right next to a road, and then go to the road and do the thing that you need to do. And you don't need much, and it's very cheap too. So, and also, pretty hard to get a lot of extra charges with that. When I glued myself to the road, I was just charged with public nuisance. I think other people, when they glue themselves to the road, they were charged with also obstructing traffic or something like that as well. But that was on a big road. So that's sort of what I would say is some street disruption tactics, using devices in groups to hold spots for days, hopefully. One thing to sort of remember with those disruptions and the sort of idea about the police having a certain capacity is that it's pretty hard to mobilise police officers. It is a workforce in a way. They have budgets, they have rosters or whatever, that kind of stuff. And what we've seen in sort of protesting history in the past is that it takes a lot of planning and money and this kind of stuff to actually mobilise hundreds of police officers. So personally, like, I wouldn't ever expect to have more than 300 police officers in Brisbane in the week at a time, actually available to go out and fulfill operations against us, because they have a whole, they have a whole capital city to police as well. So they are quite thin already, and so basically I would suggest that any main sort of confrontational point, by that I'd sort of mean it could just look like police officers forming circles around people glued on so that they can be removed. I'd suggest that not very many of those could happen simultaneously, and possibly only one at a time, since there's usually a certain officer in command. So what that means is that while one group is experiencing that confrontation with the police, not that it's much of a confrontation, well, it could be, but hopefully not, other groups actually have the freedom to escalate. So what that could mean is there's 200 people on a road, they find out that, the police are trying to remove people from a different site. That gives them the sort of avenue to escalate, to split in half, for example, and go and keep that road and go and take another road without confrontation with the police, because they're already occupied over here. So it's really important that we're actually using situations where police already are occupied to escalate in other areas. If we do that, we can do a lot more disruption than, for example, just even like holding one main intersection for a week. If we actually go out in groups of 100 or a few hundred, and do that, because the police are a sort of centralised force, and we aim to be a decentralised rebellion. Cool. So there you go. Getting arrested by gluing yourself to a road is a good disruptive thing that gets your message out there, and of course standing up for your rights in a manner that gets you arrested is a sort of moral thing. Now I'm going to now explain a little bit about the mechanics of getting arrested and the disruption that causes to sort of like the capacity of the police. So what sort of happens when you get arrested is, once you're able to be removed from a situation, you'll be put into a paddy wagon with a little seat. You'll be driven to the Brisbane Watch House, which is near like Roma Station, and you'll go into one of these 6 holding cells that are made of perspex glass, and they have benches on either side of them. Anyway, from then on, basically the situation is you go and see the sergeant on like one of these X's, and they ask you questions and get details and whatnot, and then you can either go back to the holding cell or usually go to one of the bulk holding cells and wait to get your fingerprints done over here, and then usually they'll, before the maximum time they're supposed to hold you in here, and that process is supposed to take 8 hours. So hopefully, or rather, the process outline would suggest that after a maximum of 8 hours of being in these cells and getting your fingerprints and stuff done, You'll be sent back in front of the sergeant, and the sergeant will tell you what you're charged with. Will present a document to you. It'll be called bail undertaking on the top, and they'll get you to sign that document. What that document means is that they can then release you from the watch house, and you'll have a court date where you'll come back to court to plead guilty or not guilty to your charges. The police will sort of say that like this bail undertaking, like you have to sign it. The fact of the matter is you don't. I'll get back to sort of the reasons why you might want to not sign it, and in my opinion shouldn't sign that undertaking a little bit later. But so the Brisbane Watch House is a sort of central watch house for Queensland. I was talking to the watch house boss, and he said that they process about 2,000 people. They come through there. Was it 2,000 or 20,000? Whatever equals 50 people a day. I did the math, but basically, so 50 people a day go through this processing ordeal. So this is the sort of processing like area of the watch house. So you have cells on either side, walkway, and then a desk with a bunch of officers and stuff doing paperwork. So it's already sort of at like half capacity on average. So the main sort of thing to remember is that there is a capacity. Usually they could squeeze about 8 people into these holding cells. They can squeeze, I actually haven't really been in a super full one before, but these bulk holding cells, I'd say they can probably fit 20 in each. So as you can see, they can fit a lot of people into this processing room. But I've got a tactic where hopefully we can only fit about, we can use about 14 people to fill up the watch house processing room cells. So basically what happens when you fill up the processing cells is that they, in like a mass mobilisation context, where people are still participating in civil disobedience in the city elsewhere, basically the amount of repression, you might use the word, that activist group that is still protesting can receive is minimal. So what that means is that the police have actually less capacity to arrest people that are still participating in civil disobedience if these processing cells are full. So I'll give a little bit of a story. On Rebellion Day, the 6th of August 2019, there was about 70 people in the first three or four, I forgot, main actions that got arrested, taken to the watch house, and were being processed. About 70 by about 1 p.m. At sort of 1:30 to 2 p.m, everyone still remaining at the main site, we went and we marched through the city, through Queen Street Mall, and we eventually took an intersection, and yeah, when the police did their operation to remove people, I'd estimate 20 to 30 people got arrested, but definitely more than a dozen people got arrested. But the funny, or rather confusing thing is about that, 4 people from that little skirmish in the intersection actually came back to get processed at the watch house. I was one of them with 3 others. And that's just because basically the holding cells were full. So they couldn't actually send more people to the watch house. and so what would happen is they would detain a certain person, bring them out of the group, and then basically release them or give them like a small traffic fine or this kind of thing, but they wouldn't actually be charged and they wouldn't be sent to the watch house. So what we saw was a relationship between the capacity of the watch house and the capacity of police on the streets performing operations, which is a bit counterintuitive, considering that the police on the streets and the police in the watch house are completely different, and they sort of, their job is only one or the other. But there sort of is a capacity of police on the streets, as I sort of was mentioning about the way that they perform operations to, for example, unstick someone from a road with super glue, and the capacity that the watch house has. So, yeah, cool. So the watch house has what, like 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 main processing cells, and then outside of that they have they can fit 91 people in the watch house overnight. So that's not part of the processing area unit. It's sort of down the hall from here. They have some cells where you can get cushions and blankets, and you can stay overnight in order to see the magistrate the next morning to go to court. So we'll be filling those up hopefully as well. On Rebellion Day, I think almost 30 people refused bail. I think it was like over 25 people refused bail. So refusing bail, what that means is, remember, instead of signing the document that the sergeant gives you when you come back to the desk, the second time, you refuse to sign it, you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sign that document, and then they probably try to get you to sign it again, and then you say, no, I'm alright, I'm not going to sign it. They'll then take you down the hall, give you a little bed with some cushions and blankets, and they'll feed you and stuff, and then the next morning you'll go to the courtroom to plead guilty or not guilty and get either a small fine or a different day to appear in court. So there's only 91 of those positions available in the watch house, maximum. So that's if like there's no one in the watch house to start with. So if we're able to fill those cells, pretty much, more like, they can't arrest more people as well. But I would suggest that there's some tactics where we can actually fill the bulk holding cells with less people. So let's get to that. So there's some sort of like operational like procedure, you might call it, of the watch house. Basically, people of different like birth, sexes are separated. So you'll usually have like a male and a female spot or something like that. So for example, I've only ever been into these 2 bulk holding cells. I think that's usually the female bulk holding cell. So yeah, but in June I was arrested with a woman called Ebony, and we were both we glued one hand to the road and that other hand and arms through a metal tube, and we were connected to each other inside of the metal tube. You might call this a lock-on device. And we were unstitched from the road, but they didn't cut us out of the tube, and they sent us to the Brisbane watch house, and we were like in that cell or whatever, still locked on to each other, and they pretty much just waited until we unlocked. and we didn't really have any reason to actually remain locked on because we weren't on the streets anymore. But the situation was that pretty much because we are of both opposite sex, and we have a big metal pipe in this situation attached to us, that they couldn't actually use that cell for anyone else. They could only fit 2 people in that cell, and as soon as we were unlocked, they separated us. So my proposal is that if they are going to take people away, still locked on to each other, if we get, 6 or 7 people, 6 or 7 pairs, people of opposite birth sex locked on to each other, then we can fill 7 of these. So my proposal is that they need 2 bulk holding cells and 2 normal holding cells for the perspex glass, to actually operate normally as a watch house would. So that's because they need to still process other people that are, they just have, they separate male and female. So there would be, for example, a female holding cell, male holding cell, female, and male. So that they can use that thing normally. So what that means is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pretty much holding cells to fill. So 5 pairs of people that are doing that, so that's 10 people. And they might end up cutting you out, so I'd suggest that you don't actually unlock at any point, and they'll probably have to send you somewhere else to get you cut out of the locking device, and then that's fine. But pretty much what that does is it means that anyone attached to a lock-on device with someone else has to be cut out, or fill a whole holding cell to themselves, meaning that it fills the watch house and they can't arrest more people. So that means they're actually forced to cut you out of the lock-on device on the street where you are, which often takes a lot longer than unsticking you from super glue, especially if it's a metal tube. You can use, PVC is it called? A pipe as well, that works fine. But basically a police operation needs to happen. So what that means again is a person with a big hat talks to other people with less big hats, that's how police work, and then they will form a police circle, probably set up some cover or whatever, and then just bring in the cutting team and cut you out, and that should take quite a while, especially if there's a few people, even just a few people in those devices. So they're sort of forced between cutting you out on the street where you're going to be there for maybe more hours, or filling up the watch house so they can't arrest more people. So that's why using a lock-on device with someone of the opposite birth sex is a really good tactic in this mass mobilisation during this week. Refusing bail, so I would really encourage people to refuse bail when they are offered it. So what that will mean is pretty much you'll be released from the watch house the next afternoon that you're arrested, and you'll go through court as well, and get probably a small fine. So far fines have been fairly small, especially the first time offenders. $500 or less for first time offenders. And then you don't have to go to court after. If you refuse bail, go to court, then you get it all over and done with, and you can go back out on the street and do it again and not be afraid of getting arrested. Yeah, or choose not to, that's fine as well. But yeah, if 90 people, or probably not even 90, if probably even like 50 people get arrested every day and refuse bail, basically they're at capacity, which means once those 50 people are in, everyone on the streets can escalate pretty much as they want. So it's similar to the situation where you have police performing an operation somewhere and a group somewhere else escalating their disruption. Basically, the police don't have the capacity to perform operations where people get arrested because the watch house is full. So if the watch house is full, everyone on the street can split up as much as they sort of want and go and take spots without getting arrested and charged, especially if they refuse you bail. So one possibility is that the police take you to a different watch house and process you somewhere else. Not all watch houses, and I think not very many of them, actually have overnight holding cells. They just have these processing cells. So if you refuse bail, you will come to the bridge. You will most likely come to the Brisbane watch house with everyone else, which is this watch house with the capacity of 90 people, and fill it up. So they can't just process people at different watch houses. Like refusing bail ultimately just means you don't have to come back to court, which will probably take longer anyway. And it's also a really good form of protest, in my opinion. So yeah, that's how using devices and filling the watch house affects other people. It gives them the space to actually escalate and disrupt more. So that is the disruptive advantage of getting arrested. You allow others to have the space to disrupt and escalate more because the police can't do anything about it. You might be sitting in the watch house feeling like, oh, you're not doing anything, you're just like getting arrested. But actually, you know, there are like hundreds of people on the street, like, not running amok, but decentralized, escalating throughout the city. And basically my proposal is that the state cannot deal with the watch house being full and people holding dozens of places around the city for more than sort of a fortnight. So that's our goal. And I think that refusing bail, using lock-on devices and using super glue in a decentralized manner is how we're going to do that. So October 7th is pretty close. I would suggest that everyone gets time off work, and if they don't say yes, then just consider it a strike or something, and come and join us for those at least 5 initial days in Rebellion Week. And if you're asking what you should do, or you're asking how to be most effective, or you're asking when and how you should get arrested, if that's what you're interested in, my proposal is that we fill the Brisbane watch house so that everyone else that can only be arrested maybe once or twice can be disruptive as much as possible throughout the week. So I would say I personally plan on spending my whole week inside of So I would encourage you to join me in spending every single day inside this watch house so that other people can get arrested. So what that means is getting arrested, coming here, refusing battle when it's offered to you, going to court and being released the next day, the next afternoon, and then going and sitting on the road with our comrades who will be somewhere on a road somewhere and filling up the watch house so that they don't have to. So I plan on spending all 5 days in this watch house, and yeah, that means I can pretty much fill it up for those 5 days, getting arrested 4 or 5 times, which is like maybe for me like around $2,000 in fines, which I'll be able to crowdfund. But this is a rebellion, so I think that's pretty worth it. Let's do this thing.
Okie dokie, so I might add just some small reflections briefly at the end of this video. So of course, that's a design that you can win you a campaign, in my opinion. Any campaign. We didn't, of course. And one of my main learnings was, in my opinion, the main reason why the October Rebellion here in Brisbane only lasted a week, and didn't have sort of like just like a lot of people coming and just getting on the road, even though we did design actions and the way that we took certain places in secure, tightly organized affinity groups, we basically like allowed for that. Well, more than that, we designed for it. We designed to take spaces initially with particularly exciting devices, with some setup time before cops get there and then allow people to sort of fill in the gaps, or like fill in the space that we sort of take. That didn't happen. I believe it was a cultural thing. What I mean is that it wasn't sort of in the accepted, I guess, like behavior of how we would rebel ultimately, right? So the plan was on the Monday to so we had a march. It crossed one of the main bridges into the city. We were going to stop on the bridge. We had lock-ons on a stage and speakers and stuff. We were going to block the bridge. We were going to try to hold the bridge. A little bit past the bridge, we had a little park where we had, marquees and a stage and other cute things set up to facilitate the mass mobilization. But of course, the main disruption point would be the bridge. And I think that's a pretty good idea for a first action in the rebellion. And our design principle was to create a culture of continual escalation. So that means continual disruption and continually holding more and more points. This was our main learning from the challenges that Extinction Rebellion in London in April of 2019. The main challenge that they had, their design was pretty spot on, although what they didn't have is the ability in the culture to take more spots. So what we wanted to do was start with one spot, get everyone's empowerment, keep the spot, and then every single day that the rebellion goes on, we take another spot. Whether our other spot was cleared or not, we take another spot. So, ultimately this could allow for, a month of the watch house being filled by the tactics that I outlined here. means you have, I don't know, 30 intersections, you know, or 30 main sort of places in the city being blocked, and that's, you basically win. Yeah, so the reason why I think that we didn't block the bridge, well, I actually know why. It's very simple and very embarrassing, but it is important to learn from. So, the main reason was, well, it's Queensland, a very sunny day, no clouds, it was hot. So that was the reason. It was hot, we didn't have shade, the march was long, the march was in the sun, everyone was hot. I overheard the decision being made, and that was it. So because of that, the culture of taking and holding spaces was not developed. That's it. So I just like people to pay particular attention to the culture that they develop at the very beginning and the first day and the first few days of your mass mobilization period. This like whatever that culture is, that is what's going to happen. You basically can't develop it from there on, really. And this is also from me looking at other countries and mass mobilization periods. They seem to, whatever sort of rhythm they fall in, that's what they continue on with. So yes, just pay attention to your culture. But if you do install this culture that I am developing here, which is basically like finding a bottleneck, and and having a tactic to fill the bottleneck, because that's all this video is really about. Yeah, you can enable for continual escalation and a pretty logistically easy win. So, best of luck, rebels, and I'll see you on the streets or, you know, in prison. Love you all.